Horror Mayhem 2025, Decades of Dread has begun. Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and I am one of the co-hosts for Horror Mayhem 2025, Decades of Dread. This is the third year for this event. It was created by Scott and Becky Bryant at the Bookish Bryants. Unfortunately, we lost Scott last year. He passed away, but this event is being carried on by his wife, Becky, and the rest of the co-hosts in his memory because we all like reading horror and we did not want it to go away. The theme this year is Decades of Dread. It is where readers are attempting to read horror across the decades. How each co-host or each participant wants to define those decades is up to each individual person. I have decided to read at least one short story from every decade beginning in the 1850s. That means about 4 or 5 stories per week will get me to the end with a few days to spare. I will list all the co-hosts in the description of this video. Be sure to check out all their material because it's going to be a really exciting month with a lot of diverse people reading many types of horror stories or novels under 250 pages in length. It is not absolutely essential to keep your reading to the short form of horror, but that is the gist of Horror Mayhem. Try to keep it short, but if you have to read a longer book, just go ahead and read that longer book. I will be doing this as a vlog style video every day. After I finish reading a short story, I will record a short video, probably 2 to 3 minutes in length on average. I don't want to get into any more depth than that. The Old Nurse's Tale by Elizabeth Gaskell, originally published in 1852. This is coming from the Wimbourne Book of Victorian Ghost Stories. This is a collection of ghost stories by women Victorian authors. Now, the Old Nurse's Tale has an odd narrative style to it. It is told by an elderly nurse talking to 2 young wards. They are the children of her original ward, which she sort of took under her care when she was in her 17 or 18, and she went to a house in the country because apparently the parents did not want to deal with a young baby, so the nurse went away to take care of the child. And this house only has a couple of servants living there, 2 elderly women. And it's an old house. Since this story was published in 1852, and you're now talking to the grandchild of her original ward, I'm assuming early 1800s, maybe the 1820s, somewhere around there. And it has this old, moldy feeling to it. Parts of the house are off limits and locked up. And this old nurse, when she was young, would wake up in the nights when she was a young girl and hear someone playing the organ. And of course, the 2 old women have no idea what she's talking about. And of course, there is secrets in this old house that these women are keeping. Very traditional Victorian storytelling. The narrative of the old woman telling her younger wards is kind of peculiar for a modern reader, but I guess in Victorian times that was more accepted. But is this a good ghost story? Yeah, it is a fairly good ghost story. I don't think it was particularly graphic or scary, but I'm not a Victorian reader. I can imagine a Victorian reader reading this story by candlelight, late at night, maybe in the dead of winter, and the house that they're living in may be creaking. Maybe they imagine an organ playing in the middle of the night behind a locked room and not knowing who's playing it. It could be a lot of fun for a Victorian reader. As a modern reader, I still liked it. Pretty good. And this is the first story that I'm reading out of this collection of Victorian ghost stories written by women. Hey Pip, you could have hung out just a little bit longer in the corner of that segment of the video, as people like looking at handsome cats. The Haunted Organist of Hurly, Burly by Rosa, Mulholland, originally published in 1866. I read this in the Wimbourne Book of Victorian Ghost Stories. In this story, a young woman from Italy approaches a house somewhere in secluded England. She tells the elderly couple there that she is her son, or she is their son's fiancée that she met in Italy. Their son has been teaching her how to play the organ, and he has sent her to their home to play the organ that they keep in their house. This couple is rather perplexed. This young woman does not know that their son has been dead for 20 years. And at first they think it is a scam, but she seems earnest. And there is something unusual going on in this house. Her son, there was something going on with him. And you will have to learn exactly what it was, but this is a rather effective ghost story. It has layers. It has that first initial encounter with the young woman claiming to be the fiancé, learning that her fiancé has been dead for 20 years, but they do confirm through a portrait gallery that the man she met in Italy was their deceased son. I really enjoyed this story. It is atmospheric and it is a little chilling. At the end, you know what's coming a page or two before the end, but still, it was a good ghost story. Do you believe in ghosts? I finished reading The Ghost in the Captain Brown House by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Harriet Beecher Stowe is more famously known for Uncle Tom's Cabin, the little woman who started the Civil War. This story was published in 1870. It starts off with a conversation about people asking, do you believe in ghosts? And one of the characters in the story narrates a ghost story. Now, unfortunately, this character has a very heavy dialect, and stories narrated mostly in dialect often don't work out that well, and this is one of them, but this is still a fairly interesting story. This narrator is telling his people about Captain Brown, a man of uncertain origins who was a sea captain and came to build a house in this town in the sea captain's style. He had an African American woman as a servant. Of course, African American was not the term used in this story. But more importantly is that some people noticed that there was a woman in this house, or maybe there was a woman in this house. Some people assumed that it was a ghost in the Captain Brown house and not a woman. Other people thought the captain was keeping a foreign woman And I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that quite right, but foreign woman. And he was a church-going man. And of course, they assumed that a church-going man and a respectable sea captain would not be keeping a foreign woman in his house. But she was seen late at night, sitting in the window, doing absolutely nothing as women were supposed to do. So was this a foreign woman, or was she a ghost? And this is where the story gets really rather curious, in my opinion, because all these town folks were worried about what the Captain Brown was up to. Because if he was keeping a foreign woman, that really wasn't very respectable. He shouldn't be doing that. But a ghost? Maybe a ghost would be okay for a respectable sea captain. So then you get to the story of people, and they're describing what happened at the end of this story. And there are two conflicting accounts. One is a ghost story, and one is a realistic story. And the story sort of leads the reader to ask the question, do you believe in ghosts? I really rather liked this story. When I read the first part of this story, I was assuming that, no, this is not a good story, especially because of the dialect narration. But then I started thinking about the subtext of this story, and about the people worrying about the sea captain keeping his foreign woman, and ghosts, how one was acceptable and one was not acceptable. And that made this story really rather curious in my mind. If I were an undergraduate in a college class, I think I could write a paper about this story. It's really a rather curious and interesting story. The Body Snatcher by Robert Louis Stevenson, originally published in 1884. I read this in the collection The Greatest Ghost and Horror Stories Ever Written, volumes 1 to 7. This is, of course, a Kindle book, and it is about 4,050 pages long if you were to print it. I'm not sure if it is still available in this compilation ebook. You may have to buy each individual volume by itself, but I thought it was a fabulous deal. I got 4,000 pages of ghost and horror stories for about $1.99, maybe 99 cents. Now, of course, they are all public domain, so you can probably get them all on Project Gutenberg, but it's nice to have them in this handy ebook edition. Now, about the story, The Body Snatchers. It starts off in London. There is a gentleman's club, and no, this is not a modern-day gentleman's club where naked women dance. This is a gentleman going to a place to talk and drink and discuss gentlemanly things. One of the men that frequents this club is a doctor, or was a doctor. The people participating in this club are not exactly sure. He does help out with people's ailments now and then. And then it goes into this man's story of how he got to where he was. He was, of course, at one point in his life, a medical student, and he was studying with a friend under another doctor. Now, the problem was, at this time in England, it was very hard to get bodies to study anatomy. So they had to resort to a grave robbing, and maybe just a little worse. This young doctor recognizes a woman that's been just given to him as a cadaver, and she shows signs of let's just say unnatural trauma. So he starts talking to the doctor, and he said, it's best not to ask questions. Because, yeah, she may have been murdered, but just don't ask questions about where these bodies come from, because you need to study anatomy. And of course, the story veers off from there, and it gets rather creepy. Now, this is very different from the previous stories I've read. All those were ghost stories, and this is a very naturalistic story. It is not supernatural, but it is still a horror story. And I always do like reading Robert Louis Stevenson. He's always a good bang for your buck. And this story was like 18, 19 pages long. Well worth your time. Okay, that is my first week of the Decades of Dread from 1850 to the 1880s. I did rather enjoy these short stories. Thank you for watching, and keep on reading.